All right, so this is where you should be, or should have been, I should say, on Monday, having your letters drawn out on your big paper. As you can see, I've got a line at the bottom. This is not my horizon line or anything like that. It is just a line that represented where I wanted all of my letters to touch. So I don't want you to think that there's a horizon line. You do not need to have a horizon line for this. Now, if for some reason you do have one, it's not necessarily going to hurt this, but it'll be a lot easier if you don't have one extra thing to think about, that being a horizon line. Okay, so I'm going to erase that line just so it's not confusing for anybody. Okay, but these are the letters I have. Okay, I've started with a straight angular letter so that you all can see how that will be in perspective. And then the rest are more organic so that you can see how those will also be in perspective. Now, you choose where your vanishing point is going to go. Mine is going to be probably around here in the center of the paper at the top. Okay, you can put it at the top of your paper, you can put it below or above your word or below your word. It does not matter. Just make sure that you know where your vanishing point is at all times and make sure it is not huge. You just need one small dot. Okay? All right, so from here, as we know, you need to line up each line with the vanishing point. So I'm going to go ahead and do that very quickly. So remember, you want to make sure that you're lining up each corner or angle. Okay? Remember, if there is no angle to go from, then you need to go from the curve of the letter. Okay, so if you've got curvy letters, like some of mine, you will have to go from the curve of the letter. Now, this W is going to be a good way to show you how letters can get kind of wonky. Okay, just because of how they're positioned close to the vanishing point. Now, if you look at this one, you can see that my W, if I draw a line through this arrow or through this angle, it will go through the shape completely. Okay, so I don't want a line there. I don't need one here. Okay, because I'm going to draw through the shape if I do that. All right, so next one I need to check this one here. Again, it's going to go through the shape, so it doesn't get one. So it looks like my last ones are going to be the ones here at the top. So I'm going to go up here, line up my corner, line up my other corner. Okay. All right, so now this is where we need to cut off our angles. Now, in this case, I would start with my top section. Okay, so these sections here I want to cut off first. All right, now these are pretty much on the same plane, so that means we want the same distance back for each one. So I'm going to line my ruler up with the top of the letters. Okay, and then I'm going to slide it back. And then that's going to tell me where I need to draw my lines. So between two diagonals, so you're only connecting two diagonals, never cross through a line or through a shape. Okay, so those are the tops of my letters here. Okay, so now this is where people, I think, get confused because this is where you have to finish the angle, but we didn't have something to connect it to here. So it's going to be one of those cases where you just have to simply draw from the top. Okay, now I'm noticing that I did forget a diagonal. So looking at this point here, this technically is actually going to get a diagonal. So that is totally my bad. But once you start to draw those lines, that's when you start to realize any mistakes you may have made, and that's when you want to fix those. So I'm going to draw this down and I make sure it's parallel with this line until I run into this line. Now this line is going to be the side of this part of the shape of the W. Okay, and I'll explain that here in a second. So remember, always keep it parallel. We need to finish our angle. This angle here, this angle needs to match this angle, and that is why we need to make sure that it's parallel. So, excuse me. So, going from here, I'm going to slide it back. Okay, now I can see that my lines are parallel. Okay, if I draw this down, I'm going to finish the angle. I'm only going to draw it to that line, never cross through a line or a shape. Draw it down, okay? So, a little bit weird and hard to see, but that's the inside of my W, okay? Now, from here, I need to figure out how far back I want this part of my W to go. Now, it needs to be about the same distance from here to here, here to here, all right? But if you notice, this is moved up, okay? It's slightly closer to the vanishing point than this line is. So we have about this much space that will need to be kind of added on back here. So I would say probably about this point is where that line needs to go. But again, I'm going to line it up with my line, slide it back, make sure it's parallel. All right, trying to keep the same distance between here and here, here and here. Okay, so making sure I have that extra distance. All right, I'm gonna say that that is probably about right. So I'm gonna connect my diagonal to that line that represents the W. Okay, now I realize this looks a little bit wonky and weird. It is just because of how it's positioned on the vanishing point. Here in just a second, I'll show you how to shade, and that'll help it kind of look a little bit more natural. All right, so now at this point, I've connected all of my diagonals to where they need to go. I've finished my angles. All of my angles should match. I've got the same angle here and here, okay, here and here, here and here, all of that, okay? So this is when I can erase any lines that I don't need. So I'm gonna go ahead and erase my diagonals that are going to the vanishing point. I'm not erasing the diagonals that are in the shape, okay? You need those diagonals because they make up the shape of the W. I'm only erasing the diagonals that are going to my vanishing point that I no longer need to build the shape, okay? Now, the purpose for that is to make sure that every single diagonal on this W is going towards the vanishing point. If we don't use those diagonals or a vanishing point, it is not likely that we would get it perfectly matched up to where it would be going in perspective, which gives that illusion of space. Okay, so from here, I've got all of my lines. I'm going to go ahead and finish up my other shapes or letters. Okay, so moving on to the O, we know that we need to have a curve to go off of. Okay, we have no angles. O is a circle. There are no angles in circles. So I have to go off of the curve of the O. Now, I want to make sure that I'm not creating some weird like indentation to my O. Okay, it has to be a straight line back. So it needs to look as if this diagonal, when I draw it, it is going to morph into that curve. Okay, they're going together. All right. Now, from here, I need to go on over to this side of the O and line up with the vanishing point. Move my ruler over so you can see. Okay, so now when I do this, you can see that it's going to cross through the W up here. We don't want to do that just because it makes it a little confusing and it makes more lines that you have to erase through another shape. So remember, never cross through a shape or a line. So I'm simply going to just draw my diagonal until it runs into my W, okay? Now, I know that's going to be a little confusing to look at for a little bit, but it'll be okay. So from there, remember the inside hole, if there's an angle, we can usually draw a line from it, but at this point we kind of have to eyeball the inside, and I'll show you how we're going to do that here in just a second. Okay, so I need to think about how much distance I need to take up. So we're trying to keep kind of like the same visual distance. We want to create the illusion that it's taking up the same amount of space as each letter. So looking at how much space this is taking up, I can use that to decide how much space I want my O to take up. So using my curve, okay, I'm going to try to match the curve to cut off the rest of the O. So it needs to start low, close to that point. Okay, if you get some hairy lines, that's fine. That's kind of part of sketching. And then curve it down until it meets the other side of the O. Okay, so from here I've got my curve here, my curve out. Okay, it has to be organic, so you might have to adjust your diagonal or orthogonal lines a little bit, but that is okay. The main thing is we want to make sure it takes up the same distance and that it visually is going towards this vanishing point and that we've attempted to line it up with that vanishing point. Okay, at this time, this is my line, okay, for the back of my O. So I want to try to keep about the same distance here inside of my O, but again, I have to kind of eyeball it. It's slightly positioned to the right of my vanishing point, which means we would see the inside of the right part of the O there. As you can see, I'm starting to sketch out. So I'm just following the curve, okay, and trying to kind of create that distance, that depth. All right, imagine the magnet letters you see on your refrigerator or saw on your refrigerator when you were a kid. That's kind of like what you're trying to create, is that depth inside of the letters and on either side of the letter. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So from here, I can erase this diagonal. Then we'll move on to the A. Sorry, you can hear my dog. All right, so I'm going to line up every angle. Okay. Now, again, I'm in a situation where I'm not going to see many angles. I'm going to have to do a lot of curves. So remember, if you have curvy letters, to line them up with the curve. If you have angular letters and me doing these letters is not helping you, please ask for help. Okay. All right, now this is another weird one. This one's going to go through the shape up here in the O. So again, I just need a line big enough, long enough to give me an idea of where it would end up. Okay. It's about as far down as it can go. All right, now this is where we would have an angle inside of the letter. So I need to go from the angle of this A, okay, inside of that area that's cut out from the A. So lining my vanishing point up with that angle, if I can keep my ruler straight. Okay. Now I want to check these angles down here at the bottom. Nope. And oh, that one has a little one, it looks like. Always double check just to be sure. Okay, that one's going to be a tricky one. We'll talk about that one in a second. All right, now I need to connect my diagonals, finish off my angles, get the depth. Okay, again, we're trying to keep the same, maintain the same depth between each one. Okay, so from here, I need to think about how much distance back I need to go while also matching this curve. Now, this line is kind of straight. Obviously, it's not perfectly straight, but it is straight enough that I could use a straight line to just guide my angle. So just to make sure it's parallel. So I'm going to slide this back. I'm going to start with a straight line. But that line then needs to turn into a curve. Like so. It's a little too curved. Okay, so from there, I need the same kind of distance here. Not going to be much of a difference. Like, I'm not going to really think about making a line there. I might just make a tiny one there, if you can see that, right here, just to kind of show that it did get cut off, and that kind of matches the amount of space I have there. So at that point, where I've made that line, that's where I need to, and notice it's parallel, matching the curve. I need to connect this and then this like kind of imaginary diagonal we have floating back here. Okay, so from here, I'm going to connect down to this imaginary line until I run into the O. All right, so as you notice, is your letters will be close together, most likely, so it's going to be a little bit hard to draw the perspective and be able to see all sides of the letter. Some of them may overlap, and that's totally fine, but you just have to be really careful about where you're connecting your lines in order for it to look correct. So as you notice, I'm kind of curving my pencil, making sure that I have an even curve. I'm going to kind of curve this in a little bit. Okay, so we have a total shape there. Again, I'm not going to be able to see where this shape gets cut off back here because of how it's positioned. So the depth here inside of the cutout is correct. So I'm just going to leave it there. This one's really not going to change much, but it looks really weird the way that it is. So up at the top, I'm going to kind of do what I did here, and I'm just going to pull out a line there just to show that it kind of curves out and in, because if we leave the straight line there, it's going to look really bizarre. So you can kind of see the difference here. I'll make this bold. Okay. And then from here, again, we're moving on to the next one. I'm going to connect the diagonals to the vanishing point. Connect the next corner or angle to the vanishing point. Okay, again, this is one down here that we're going to have to cross through the shape, so we're going to have to only draw the line until it crosses through the shape. That was not to the ruler at all. Okay. Now, these are the weird ones where there's curves coming out to the side. Like, you need to make sure that you check every angle and curve. So technically, because of how this is angled, or position to the vanishing point, I'm going to have a diagonal there and cut that off later. Okay, so make sure that you're checking each and every one. Okay, and that's my final one. This one, we'll double check, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, no. Okay, so there's that. Now I need to cut off my angles. Now this has kind of got a curve to it like this, but again, I can do the same thing I did with the A and pull it back. Now I know what's going to be tempting is to line this up, the H up with your W, but that's not correct because one, it's on an angle, and two, it is further down from the W, so they would not have the same depth in terms of being all the way up here. We do want to think about the same depth, but we can see a little bit more of this part of the letter than we can here. You're getting the illusion here that this is short, but it's not. It's this width here, same here. It's just how it's in perspective with the vanishing point. And I know all that sounds like gibberish, but it makes sense once you see it all put together. So pulling this back, I'm going to think about kind of more along the lines of the distance I have here. That looks about right to me. Making sure it's somewhat parallel. Again, that's a curved line, so it's not going to be perfect. But there's my straight line. So now I want to make this more into like a curve to match the front of my H. Subtle, but details are important. Okay, now we need to connect this angle to this imaginary point down here where my H crossed through my A, okay? So, notice I forgot to erase my diagonals from my A, which will make things very confusing. So I will do that now. Always erase your diagonals, because then things get confusing. Okay, do as I say, not as I do. Just kidding. All right, so from here, I'm going to connect the angle here, where this point meant the diagonal, to imaginary angles somewhere down here that we cannot see. Confusing, I know. All right, so from here, I'm going to draw this curve. And this is, I know this seems really strange. You just have to really make sure you're matching this curve. So I'm going to have to really pull it in. Think about the angle you're making here. You want to make the same angle back here. Okay, so notice how that's curving in. Now, this is going to come down, curve, and then meet my H. Okay, all of that is covered by the A. Therefore, I do not need to finish that line. All I'm going to see is this here, and this here, and then my A is covering the rest. Okay, so that's good. Now we have to look at this here, this whole situation. Now, thinking about the depth we have, we are not going to see where this curves in. So that's going to stay. Seeing this here, we're also not going to see where that curves up. So we just need to leave it where it is. Okay, so this letter is complete. And again, I need to remember to erase my diagonals. Only the diagonals that are not making up the shape. Okay, now at this point, I should have all of my angles correct, all of my lines correct. Okay, so at this point, you can erase your vanishing point. You do not need it any longer. Oops. Make sure that your lines are really nice and erased. Okay. Now from here, this is where we need to start shading.